Welcome back to On the Clock with Steve Shoup. I'm your host, Megan Shoup, and we are, of course, going to be talking NFL draft every week leading up to the draft. I, of course, am joined by my brother, Steve Shoup, who is the creator of On the Clock. Steve, are you excited to talk NFL draft again?
I am now that every team's done. The Rams have celebrated, and we are ready for the offseason.
That's right. We are officially in the off season, and guys can celebrate the off season by using On the Clock. Again, Steve created On the Clock, geez, 8, 9 years ago, and it is a mock draft simulator that you can simulate the entire 2022 NFL draft. It's a good way to learn about prospects. It's a good way to see how different plausible scenarios can play out. And we're adding more big boards every week with the goal of having nearly 32 or more big boards ideally as we lead up to the NFL draft, which really emulates the NFL draft. So, Steve, I know you're ready to talk NFL draft because you could talk about it 365 days a year. So, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, what we're going to do, since we're still a little early in the draft season, we're going to do a pre-free agency kind of team needs. So, we're going to go around the NFL, 32 teams, a minute for each team, 32 teams, 32 minutes. And you were just going to tell me for each team what they need to walk away with this offseason. So, of course, we're going to redo this show and do a post free agency and edition of this. So, but now let's just really looking at the offseason, now that it is officially offseason, this offseason, what do each of these 32 teams need? What do they need to walk away with, when the offseason is said and done? So you ready to get started?
Ready.
All right. Well, we're of course going to start with the NFC East because that's our team, the Washington Commanders. It's hard to get used to saying that, but we'll start in the NFC East. Tell me what our favorite team, the Washington Commanders, need to prioritize and walk away with this offseason.
Well, the first one's pretty simple, and it's a quarterback. We know that that's what Ron Rivera wants. They do have some other needs. They need to replace Brandon Scherff at guard. They could use maybe another weapon, some defensive back help, particularly free safety and a middle linebacker. But it starts and ends with getting a new quarterback for Ron Rivera.
Okay. Well, I would absolutely agree. Are there what would be the most secondary need for Washington?
I think it's getting that guard to replace Brandon Scherff.
Okay.
Their offensive line was key for them last year when they were competitive. He
Right.
typically was active, so when
Absolutely.
he's not in there, they struggled some.
Okay. All right. So moving right along, we'll go to our rivals, the Dallas Cowboys.
Dallas, they're the king of the division right now, and with the massive gap of Dak Prescott versus every other quarterback in the division, they just need to keep building pieces. They need to make some decisions at wide receiver with Michael Gallup, a free agent, some big money already invested in Amari Cooper. But this is a team that they just need to add some extra pieces, a little bit more defensive help, some more offensive line depth that bit them a little bit, and replacing Michael Gallup if he leaves in free agency.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, now let's move over to the Philadelphia Eagles. What do they need to walk away with this offseason?
The Eagles are in a prime position with 3 first-round picks.
Sure.
So I could see them trying to get aggressive and jumping up to grab an impact defensive player. Their biggest need is probably the pass rush. They don't really prioritize linebackers the same way some other teams do. So it's kind of a weaker unit, but that's kind of not their defense philosophy. Offensively, I think they need more weapons. DeMonta Smith's a stud. Dallas Goedert's great. But you're going to roll Jalen Hurts. You need to give him more weapons than those two guys. So that would be the need on offense.
It will be interesting to see if they try to upgrade from Jalen Hurts because there are some rumors out there. What do you think if you were in Vegas? What would you put the chip on? Are they going to upgrade or no?
Well, I think they're the one team who really could make Seattle interested in the Russell Wilson trade.
They've
Put a
got the
couple of those
ammo.
first together,
Yeah.
plus Hurts, and you get Russell Wilson. And like I said, like the gap between Dak and the rest of the quarterbacks in the division, Hurts right now is the number 2. But if you make Wilson that's neck and neck. So we saw the Eagles were a good team overall, and Hurts did okay, but not consistently. We saw once he got against like top level competition, he struggled, and that's to be expected for a second year guy who is doesn't have a consistent passing arsenal to rely on. So.
Okay. Well, then let's round out the NFC East with the New York Giants. They have a new coach now. What do you think they're going to do, or what do they need?
I mentioned it when we talked about the top 10, considering they have two picks in the top 10, and I think they're playing for the following season. I don't think they see 2022 as their year, and I don't think they should. They've put so many weapons around Daniel Jones. It just hasn't worked out. They're going to give him one more shot, and I think they're looking at it. If it works, great. We got our franchise quarterback. If not, we need to have as many assets as possible ready to go get that franchise quarterback next offseason. So I think that's their mentality. I expect them to make trades both with players and picks, try and stockpile more assets for next year, get more rookies this year, and hope that you have that core in place where you get a quarterback next offseason and you can go from there.
Yes, that makes a ton of sense. And what Steve referred to is you can check out our show from last week where we really broke down the top 10 picks and how interesting the top 10 picks are going to be this year and kind of the needs for each of them. And of course, the Giants have two in the top 10, so that will be very interesting. All right, now let's move over to the NFC North, and the most interesting team to talk about is, of course, the Green Bay Packers and what is Aaron Rodgers going to do. Obviously, we're waiting to hear on that, but what is their offseason priority?
Well, I think it boils down to two sides. If Rodgers is coming back, that means Davante Adams is coming back, and you're taking another run at it. So you're going to have to make some tough decisions, cutting some players, restructuring a lot, putting a lot of money into the future. And, Rodgers is going to have to be okay with some of those things. They might not be able to re-sign Valdez-Scantling and some other pieces, but that's kind of what you're going to have to do in that scenario, given their cap situation. The other side is if Rodgers wants to move on, and it sounds like it's kind of the ball's in his court, then I think you go all in. You don't try and then retain Davante Adams and do all this other stuff. I think you trade Davante Adams, you franchise him, you trade him maybe as a package deal. You move some other assets, you clear up money, knowing that next year's not going to be your year, even though the North is fairly weak overall. You at best be looking at 7-9, 8-8, I think, without Rodgers. So I think you just kind of move what assets you can and kind of build to the future and hope you can jumpstart in 2023, 2024. Hopefully if Jordan Love is the guy, but give him a couple years, try and start building around him. But I wouldn't do anything to hurt your long-term potential.
Right. Well, we should know very soon and as to which way that's going to go. And that is very interesting. But let's move over to the Minnesota Vikings, who also have a new coach. What do you think their priorities need to be?
It looks like Kevin O'Connell is going to stick by Kirk Cousins. And I think part of the reason why is what I just said. The North is fairly weak. And if Rodgers leaves, it is wide open.
Sure.
And, there's just not a lot of great quarterbacks out there. Cousins has some limitations, but he's better than, 2/3 of the league right now. And it's a weak rookie class. So I think you stick by Cousins. You got, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen. You got to get some offensive line help in there, and then kind of restock defensively. They're going to have to make some tough decisions there, but just kind of restock defensively and hope it's enough. And hope Kevin O'Connell, who worked with Cousins before as a QB coach in Washington,
right?
They can mesh and be on the same page, because it hasn't felt like Cousins and the Vikings offense has been on the same page the last couple of years.
Sure. All right. Well, now let's go to the Chicago Bears. What do they need to help their second-year quarterback?
Well, they're the team that are very intriguing, whether Rodgers is back or not, because they, we saw last year they have the defense, even with some key injuries. They were strong defensively down the stretch. They just need Justin Fields to grow. You need to give him some more weapons. Allen Robinson's going to move on. Hopefully a guy like Cole Kmet can step up. You have David Montgomery, you have Khalil Herbert, you're really good running back. Mooney's a good receiver, but you need another receiver. And then otherwise you need to protect him. He's still going to be young. He's still going to make mistakes. We see it with young quarterbacks all the time. But give him some more time in the pocket, because he's got an electric arm and can make big plays, but you got to give him some time. So another receiver's number one priority. O-line would be next.
Well, it makes a ton of sense. We saw what giving Burrow his weapons for him did for him in his second year. So
Yeah,
that makes a ton
big,
of sense. Yeah, big difference.
big help getting a guy like that.
Right, absolutely. Okay, well then let's go over to the Detroit Lions. It sounds like they will stick with Goff for another year, and then what is their priority?
Yeah, I think they kind of read the situation that the quarterback market out there, both free agency wise and draft wise, is not pretty. They do have two first rounders. Maybe they would, look for a young quarterback at the end of the first round with that Rams pick.
Hmm.
But I think, Goff is still relatively young, and it's been not pretty these last couple of years with Jared Goff. But again, like, we're talking about a situation where, there are a lot of teams out there who would have liked a Jared Goff last year.
Right.
And, you have some pieces, Hawkinson, Swift, St. Raw, uh, keep building on that. And you're probably not going to do much this year, but if you add an impact player at the top of the draft with your first pick, add another first rounder, and then just get ready in a position to see in 2023 if Goff's probably not your long-term guy, but he gets you another year at a reasonable rate. Just with the way that those contracts worked out. So I think you just kind of status quo there and just try and add impact, particularly on defense. I obviously think that's where they're going to go at the top of the draft, taking one of those top edge rushers. So, I think that's just keep building that defense
Build that
and
defense. Okay.
maybe get another offensive piece for the future.
Okay. Let's move over to the NFC South. And of course, I think the biggest story is Tom Brady has retired. So I think that leaves the NFC South wide open. Let's start with the Buccaneers. What do they do or prioritize?
Well, Buccaneers, they have some key free agency decisions. And, we know, like, Rob Gronkowski, Chris Godwin, um, and money is not necessarily their friend right now. But at the same time, this division is wide open. There's no clear front runner, even without Tom Brady on the Bucs. So do they go and just get a stopgap quarterback, a Jameis Winston, a Mitch Trubisky, somebody like that, and you could win this division, particularly if you get one or two of these pieces to come back with them. So, I think that's probably the way they end up going. I don't think Bruce Arians is going to want to do a rebuild.
Right.
And I think, they could look at it like, we just kind of keep this train rolling and hope that, maybe Winston's not going to get us to a Super Bowl, or maybe Trubisky's not going to get us to a Super Bowl, but maybe it gives us a little time to figure things out. And, it's tough when you have a wide open division like this. It's tough to just say we're totally punting and
Right.
we're rebuilding. So, because fans, fans want to go to see playoffs. Fans want to win, and you can maybe talk yourself into a rebuild when you're in a situation like Cleveland a couple years ago, or Jacksonville or Houston, when it's like you're looking up against some, Jacksonville looking up against a team like the Titans, and it's like we have no chance to compete. Let's rebuild for a couple years. It's not been working out too well in Jacksonville, but that's the idea. Um, Here it's tough with how open this division is, because I think they have the most talent, even without Tom Brady. So get a solid quarterback in there and you can still compete.
Okay. And so what about the Falcons with Matt Ryan? What do you see there?
I mean, the Falcons are the only team who are likely to return their starting quarterback.
Hmm.
The big issue, I think, is Calvin Ridley. Is he coming back? Are you trading him? What are you doing there? You have Kyle Pitts. You're probably going to re-sign Cordero Patterson. Um, it's just, we see Ryan starting to go downward. I mean, it's just amazing. 2018, he was so amazing on their Super Bowl run, and since then it's been really bad these last 2 years, especially. So, can he, jumpstart and have one or two more good years? Yeah, maybe. I mean, we saw, this past year was bad for Ben Roethlisberger, but the 2 years prior he was pretty good.
Right. Right.
And and Roethlisberger is a couple years older than, and same with Philip Rivers. Like his last year in or 2 years with the Chargers, And then his last year with the Colts, he was fine. So,
Right.
maybe Matt Ryan can have that kind of resurgence. We'll see. But they are a team that has a ton of offensive needs and a ton of defensive needs. So it's a really tough position for them to be in. They really could go anywhere and improve this roster with how bad their defense is played. They
So
need
kind
more
of best
offensive line help.
available.
And yeah, they need more offensive line help. And if there's no Calvin Ridley, they need weapons also. So.
Right. Okay. Well, then let's head over to the Carolina Panthers. And what do you think they need to prioritize?
Panthers are the team that I think if it's not the Bucks, they're the most likely to make the playoffs. They need Christian McCaffrey to stay healthy.
Right.
So better health would be their number one priority. But, you have DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson. There have been rumors that maybe he's on the trade block. But, they need to get a quarterback in there. They're another team that they might look to grab a Kenny Pickett just because he's the most certain and could kind of get them to the baseline. I mean, as bad as it is, he might be the best quarterback in the division, depending on what the Bucks end up doing and if Matt Ryan has a resurgence or not. So they need a quarterback. That's first and foremost. Whether it's a veteran, I don't see them making a big trade. They've already given up some assets for Sam Darnold, so I don't know if they can make a big trade for Deshaun Watson or something like that. But this team should be competing for the playoffs. They're young on defense. There's some young offensive weapons. O-line could get better, and that's where it puts some other assets. But quarterback, it's they need to significantly address that, whether it's a major high draft pick or trading for somebody.
Okay. Now, to finish out the South, what do the Saints do? Sean Payton's retired. Obviously, they don't really have a quarterback. What do they do?
Yeah, Saints are in the rough spot because they're in not only a brand new coach, losing Sean Payton, who, I mean, he deserves so much credit for how he kept them competitive last year, given how many quarterbacks they went through, the Michael Thomas situation, all the other stuff they have going on. But I mean, people talk about the Packers being in a rough cap spot. The Saints are essentially double that. And they don't, and that's not including their quarterback. The Packers situation is partly due to Aaron Rodgers. So they're just in a horrendous spot. Taysom Hill, who they gave money to, had a major injury the last game of the year. James Winston's coming off a major injury. You also have the Alvin Kamara thing. What happened at the Pro Bowl? Like, he might not even be around the first couple of weeks. He might need to be suspended. So that will play out. And then Mike Thomas sat out all year. So they are a true mess right now. Maybe, hopefully they can kind of just one step at a time get it back together, get Mike Thomas back on the team. Hopefully things clear up with Kamara and Taysom Hill's healthy. But even then, they're going to lose some key free agents. Armstead, their left tackle, is almost assuredly gone. It'd be next to impossible for them to retain him. And then defensively, you have a lot of older players who you might have to start cutting and letting go or trading. So it could be a long rebuild for them.
Yeah.
So they're in a tough spot.
What would be the biggest need, though, for this year? Where would you start?
I think I would probably start at adding a defensive player. Even though their defense is their strength right now, I think you just could keep that going because, like I said, you have some guys like Cam Jordan who, he's getting up there in age, so maybe either he needs to move on or, I mean, he is a hero in New Orleans, but just financially they might need to move on from him. So I'd add another defensive stud and just build that way and build that side of the ball, and hopefully that side's ready when you can start focusing on offense again.
Okay. Well, now let's move to the NFC West, and this division is just loaded. Let's start with the Super Bowl champions, the Rams. They don't have picks and they don't care, but what do they need to do to try to make a run back year?
Well, the number one thing they have to do is basically make sure whatever it takes to ensure that Aaron Donald does not retire. He made comments like, if you bring back this group, I'm back. And so I bring back this group. Whatever it takes. I mean, Aaron Donald, he's the best defensive player in the game. Honestly, like one of the best we've ever seen, up there with the Reggie Whites, the Bruce Smiths of the world, of the history of the NFL. And, as long as he's on that team, and you're bringing some of these other pieces back, this defense is going to take you far. Hopefully they can maybe bring Odell back. I mean, it's obviously a Super Bowl injury. Not sure how effective he'd be early on, but and the Robert Woods injury. So you probably need more weapons help. But I mean, Matt Stafford, he's still getting it done. Cooper Kupp's best receiver in the league, as we saw. He just took over that last drive. Just incredible. They have a lot of running back talent, particularly with Henderson and Akers. So they're going to
retaining.
They're going to have to replace Andrew Woodworth. He clearly is retired, and Eric Weddle, who came on just for a couple of weeks. But so they'll make some moves. But yeah, I mean, just the number one thing though is keeping Aaron Donald. That's what it boils down to.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, what about the Seattle Seahawks there? I know are some rumors possibly Russell Wilson could get me moved. I wish it could be to Washington, but if Russell Wilson stays, what do you do around that?
If he stays, I think you do what they should have always done and just invest in the offensive line.
Right.
He just gets beat up too much, doesn't have enough time, can't consistently. I mean, we see when Russ is on and they allow Russ to go back and throw 35 times, which is rare. He shreds teams. He puts up huge numbers, and he does have a couple of big weapons in Metcalf and Lockett. So why shouldn't he? But I think they just need to continue to build that offensive line, protect Russ. Yeah, the defense isn't what it was a couple of years ago with the Legion of Boom, but it can still be okay. It can still be effective. I just think you have to protect Russ. Now, because of all that, I do think this is why Russ wants to leave. It's been year after year where they just don't invest in the offensive line. Russ is getting beat up every year.
Right.
And I think he sees, like it might be time to move on. He
wants to have a long career. So if he wants to have a long career, you got to protect him.
And they also don't let him throw. I mean, the number of times that he's allowed to throw 35 times plus in a game is incredibly small. And I mean, this guy's as talented as Dak Prescott. He's just, he can be in the same stratosphere as Josh Allen's and Patrick Mahomes and guys like that. Let him play. Let Russ be Russ. And so, I actually think moving on from them probably is in their best long-term interest, just because, right now you're looking up at some really good teams in the Rams and 49ers and even the Cardinals. So I would reset, and you could trade a guy and get a massive return.
What would you rebuild with that return? What would you prioritize?
Well, I mean, I think you need to prioritize getting a young quarterback, whether it's Jalen Hurts as part of the deal or some other kind of situation like that, or a three-way trade to get Deshaun Watson to come in.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter what you do. You need to fix that offensive line. You do need more defensive help as well. But again, I don't think that's as big of their issue as some people make it out to be.
Okay. How about the Arizona Cardinals? I know Kyler Murray, there was some rumors this offseason. I assume at this point he's coming back. So what is the Cardinals' priority?
Well, I think Cardinals' priority is a little similar to the Seattle, and that's keep your quarterback happy. And I think, we saw this team without DeAndre Hopkins. They just were not the same. And even Hopkins, when he played this year, was not 100%. So Christian Kirk is a fine number 2 receiver. Rondell Moore and guys like that could do okay, but there's just no consistency. And, I mean, AJ Green and Zach Ertz played big roles on this team, but they're kind of at the downside of their career. You need a young stud receiver to go along with Murray. I mean, Murray's got an incredible arm, can run around, make big plays in the pocket, let a big time receiver get open. You want a big play guy who can go downfield that Murray can buy time and just launch, his huge arm to get down there. And so I think that has to be their priority, including even trading up in the draft if that's what it takes, because they need that more than anything.
Okay. Well, let's finish up the NFC with the 49ers. Let's assume that Lance is the quarterback. What do they do to surround him with what he needs?
Well, I think, number one, you trade Jimmy Garoppolo, you probably get a couple picks. I think they're going to push for like a second rounder. You'll probably get more like a third and a fifth rounder, something in that department. They could use some more offensive line help, but overall, they're pretty strong there. They could probably use a guard. Defensively, I do think they need to add more. You still have a good unit, a good front, but your secondary was kind of weak, and it got exposed sometimes against some big passing attacks. I think that would be the area that I go to build this team up. Their run defense was incredibly strong. Their pass rush was good, but their secondary needs to be able to cover better, especially when you are playing, elite receivers and elite passing games.
Yeah, just in their division. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, now let's move over to the AFC and let's try to keep it closer to a minute. I know we could talk about this all day long, but we're going to go around the AFC now and tell me your needs now, starting with the AFC East. And let's start with the Buffalo Bills. They were right there at the end. Where do you go to help Josh Allen out?
Well, for that, I think it's pretty simple. Just keep adding to that O line, to the weapons. Emmanuel Sanders is a free agent. Gabriel Davis obviously stepped up, but you just need to make sure you have enough weapons for Allen. We saw what he can do. Diggs is still great. I know people talk about the slow playoffs, but I mean, Diggs and Davis are particularly imposing going forward. But I'd add another piece to that mix. Defensively, just trying to retain as many of those guys as possible. You'd 7 Pro Bowlers. I don't care what happened in that Kansas City game. It's one of the best defenses in the league.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Miami Dolphins, new coach, sticking with Tua. What do you do there?
Yeah, I think, you added Jalen Waddle last year. You tried to add Will Fuller. It did not work. Parker, you need more weapons. Gesicki's a free agent, so that's a big question mark if they can bring him back, because he was the most consistent guy after Waddle. So O-line, they've invested a lot of picks. It's not all worked out. They still need to invest. I'd probably bring in a free agent to get a veteran guy. But I think you got to ride with Tua. He's your guy, and I think Mike McDaniel's an interesting guy to get the most out of him. I mean, he's been with Kyle since the Washington days, and we've seen him grow young quarterbacks. Guys like Kirk Cousins. Get the most out of quarterbacks, I think, is the best way to put it. We saw Matt Ryan have his best years with Kyle, and same with Jimmy Garoppolo. So.
Yeah, absolutely. He has some fun press conferences too. So that'll be fun to watch. All right. Now let's go over to the New York Jets. What do you do there with Zach Wilson in his second year?
Yeah, I think the Jets, obviously Wilson was banged up. Their offensive line, they still need left tackle. Becton has been injured, just hasn't worked out as they hoped. But so I'd like some more offensive line depth, because Wilson cannot be running for his life again.
Right.
Receiver wise, guys like Crowder and Berrios are free agents. You probably bring one of those back. Corey Davis is fine. Elijah Moore looks to be potential stud.
Right.
Michael Carter was a nice running back. So honestly, offensively, I think you're okay. Another receiver, but that's about it. Maybe a tight end. Early, it's a strong draft class, so maybe grab a pick there in like the second round. But defensively, I put a lot of talent. You're in a division with the Bills. Pats and Dolphins can have some offensive potential as well, but your defense needs to step up. That's number one key, and I prioritize the pass rush and secondary.
Sure, of course. Okay, and then let's round out the AFC with Mac Jones and the Patriots. Mac Jones took them to the playoffs in his first year. What does he need in year 2?
Well, I think he needs weapons. We saw that he did really well, and they invested heavily bringing in both Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry last year. I mean, Henry was the only one who really did anything of those two. They got the most they could out of guys like Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar and that group
Kendrick
of guys.
Bourne, yeah.
And Kendrick Bourne, but it's not enough. All those guys are like number 2s, number 3s,
right,
or 4s, and you need more. So they need to go out and get them a top receiver for sure.
Okay, let's move down to the AFC South. Let's start with the Tennessee Titans, who won the South last year.
Yeah, probably their number one thing is just better health. Henry and AJ Brown limped into those playoffs.
Yeah.
Their defense is good. Could get a little better on the back end. They probably could use a corner, so I'd probably make that their top priority. I believe their offensive line will mainly be back. They could probably use another offensive lineman, but the whole Julio situation is tough. So I'd add another weapon to go with AJ Brown as well.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. How about the Colts and what are they going to do with Carson Wentz?
Boy, that's the big one. It sounds like it's just not going to work out there. So where do you go? Aaron Rodgers, those types of things could be pipe dreams.
Right.
You don't have a first round pick to draft a rookie quarterback. So, you could be stuck with the Jameis Winston, Mitch Trubisky type quarterbacks. This is a team with the stellar defense, elite running back, good receiver, great offensive line. So you can be competitive. Philip Rivers was competitive the year before with this team. So, figuring out the quarterback situation is number one thing. But boy, I have no idea what they're going to do with this.
Yeah. All right. Well, now let's discuss the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, they have a new coach and year two with Trevor Lawrence. What do they need to do?
Yeah, I think they're in a rough spot just with how ugly that Urban Meyer situation ended up getting. They couldn't even figure out getting the top coach they wanted. Byron Leftwich wanted them to move on from Trent Baalke, and the ownership disagreed. So, maybe Doug Peterson can find that Philly magic again. Trevor Lawrence, I think he's got a lot of potential, but boy, you do hope that year one didn't set him back. So I think you just kind of almost have to treat him like a rookie. Add some pieces around him. You have some receivers, but you're getting Travis Etienne back at running back. Prioritize the O-line a little bit. But I think it's going to be another year of lumps. They do the top pick in the draft. Maybe they can trade back. If not, you get a defensive stud, I think is how it boils down.
Right. Okay. And let's round out the South with the Houston Texans. Obviously the Watson situation is going to be the question mark there.
Yeah, I think so. I think the other thing that you have is there were some rumors today of not only Watson, but they could trade Brandon Cooks, they could trade Laremy Tunsil, so they could kind of do an all-in rebuild, and that probably is the best for them. Like I said, Titans are not going anywhere. Your cap situation isn't great. I mean, you had Deshaun Watson on your team for nothing this past year, doing absolutely nothing. So I think you kind of reset and trade all these good veterans, and it's probably going to be a pretty ugly year next year, but that's the best thing. But it all kind of depends on when you can trade Watson, and it's how his legal situation resolves itself, because teams are going to be leery to make a big deal for him until they know what they're getting.
Right. All right, over to the AFC North, and let's start with the Pittsburgh Steelers now that Ben Roethlisberger has retired after, what was it, 17 years, 16 years? I mean, my goodness. So that's a long run with a quarterback, and they have had it's just been winning season after winning season, under Tomlin, and then before that, Cowher. Where do they go now?
Well, I think, and this is a recurring theme, but they need a quarterback. But I also don't know if they're going to, I don't even think they'd go all in for like a Russell Wilson trade or an Aaron Rodgers type trade if those were available. I think they're going to see it that, we have a young core of offensive weapons: Najee Harris, Claypool, Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth. Let's just get somebody who can move the football. And then the other thing you need is offensive line help. So quarterback and offensive line. The defense is much thinner than it was a couple of years ago when they were truly elite, but you have studs that the team can rely on, namely TJ Watt. So I think defense, you kind of hold, don't invest too much, but just get that quarterback, get a little bit better offensive line, and you can compete. But yeah, they're now looking at a tougher division for sure.
Who would be your first choice for quarterback for them? Like a Trubisky, like as someone who can.
Yeah, I think Trubisky, James Winston. If
Sure.
the Colts are kind of giving away
Right.
Carson Wentz, Wentz in all his years in Philly, outside of the last year, he was productive. Again, only 1 year kind of played at the MVP like level, but they move the football, they win
Mm-hmm.
games, and we saw that with the Colts. I mean, yes, it was just terrible, that Jacksonville game, no doubt about that. But um, they were competitive almost every week. I mean, he started the year with 2 broken ankle. I mean,
Right.
so he was banged up. They were dealing with a lot early on, but they found their footing and were competitive down the stretch. Pittsburgh could see a cheap option, and Jimmy Garoppolo is another one I think they could make that kind of mid-trade for, like give up a third rounder for Jimmy
Right.
Garoppolo. We just need a guy who can get the football to these weapons.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Well, let's go over to the Cincinnati Bengals. They made a hell of a run in year two with Burrow, and made it all the way to one of the last plays in the Super Bowl. So where do they go? Where do they go from here?
It's pretty simple, Cincinnati, and that's the offensive line.
Right.
I mean, Joe Burrow is a stud.
Protect
His
Burrow.
weapons are a stud. Joe Mixon. Their defense played much better than above expectations.
Right.
Just, add a little extra there, but it's all about the offensive line.
Yeah.
Keep Burrow
Absolutely.
upright, and good things happen.
Right. That one's easy. All right. Let's move over to the other side of Ohio and discuss the Cleveland Browns.
Cleveland is in a tough spot because on paper they don't have any massive needs. Weapons wise, they've stud running backs for days. They've Landry, some young receivers like Peoples-Jones, Hooper, Bryant. They need help there, but it's not like a massive need. And same with the offensive line. They need some better health for guys like Conklin and Jared Wills, who, were both banged up some last year. But, none of those are massive needs. It's honestly, can Baker be healthy? Can we fully see what are we getting? Are we getting the Baker from who had that great run at the end of 2020 when
Right.
they went to the playoffs and beat the Steelers in the postseason? Or are we getting the Baker who, this past year, how much of that was injury related? So
Right.
that's what they need to answer. Defensively, Myles Garrett is a stud. They have some other elite pieces and Ward and a few others. So, I mean, they can build around that. Clowney's a free agent. I'm sure they'd love to bring him back, but add some on defense, get another weapon, but really it's all about seeing if Baker's your guy. And who knows, the whole Baker Kevin Stefanski relationship. That's going to be interesting to watch.
Right. Okay, let's finish up the AFC North with the Baltimore Ravens. What do they need to focus on?
Well, Ravens, they're another team who they need to focus on their offensive line. Ronnie Stanley has not been able to stay healthy the last couple of years. We saw Lamar just get beat up. We saw Huntley get beat up when he went in there. Um, their weapons are fine,
Right.
particularly with J.K. Dobbins coming back at running back. Defensively, they do need to get better. Their secondary struggled down the stretch. But again, some of that was due to injury. They lost some of their key guys, but they need to add more there in the secondary and the back end because they are playing against a guy like Joe Burrow twice a year who absolutely shredded them both times.
Right. Okay. And now let's finish up the 8 divisions and go over to the AFC West, another very competitive division. Let's start with the Kansas City Chiefs.
I mean, what do you get for the quarterback who,
Yeah.
has been to the AFC Championship game the last 4 years?
Right.
I'd get him another weapon. They went out, they prioritized the offensive line this past year, and it helped. But, as we saw, when teams could take away Hill and or Kelsey, there are some games where some of these other guys like Hardman and Pringle, et cetera, stood up, had pretty good games, but they need another weapon. So, money's going to be tight. And so maybe they, just focus on the draft, trade up even to get one of the better receivers, particularly a guy that they think can be productive early on. So that's really what I do because, you get Patrick Mahomes, another top receiver, and that offense could be even better. So
Look out. Yeah. All right. Well, let's head over to the Vegas Raiders. Do you think they'll stick with Carr and what do they need to build around him?
Yeah, it sounds like Josh McDaniels really likes Carr, though they're going to, probably extend him and build around him. I think they too need to prioritize getting weapons. The Henry Ruggs tragedy,
Hmm.
yeah, and Edwards has not developed as they hoped.
Right.
Luckily, Renfro has become a good slot. But they're really Waller and Renfro. That's it. Zay
Hmm.
Jones was the best outside receiver. I mean, he'd
Right.
be number 3 on most other teams. So
Right.
they need to prioritize Green and big weapon, and then defensively, their secondary is pretty bad. Also, they need to
Sure.
prioritize that area.
Okay. Yeah, especially going up with like guys like Mahomes and Justin Herbert, who Chargers. What do they need around Justin Herbert?
Chargers, I mean, it's kind of a recurring theme in this division, but Mike Williams is going to be a free agent.
Right.
Keenan Allen's getting up there in age. You let Hunter Henry walk the year before. Jared
Hmm.
Cook kind of, you know, was a stopgap, but,
Hmm.
he's been around forever.
Right.
So, I think if they don't bring back Mike Williams, then they need to go out and get somebody for sure. Defensively, overall, I think they're pretty fine. They could use a little bit more, maybe pass rush depth, and need to make a few key decisions on their D line. But I think their O line could use maybe another right tackle, but O line would be secondary. But getting a top receiver for Herbert would be the number one thing.
Okay. And then finally, let's round it out with the Denver Broncos. I'm sure all Denver Broncos fans are hoping that Aaron Rodgers says, "Yes, I do want to be traded," and would love a deal to be worked out because that has been one rumored destination. But if they don't trade for Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Rodgers stays or goes somewhere else, what do the Broncos need to do?
You know, Broncos are in a tough position because it's clear what they need. Even after trading Von Miller, their defense was fine. Their defense was good.
Hmm.
The defense kept them competitive. Their offensive line they've built up over the last couple of years. They could use some help, but it's not a massive priority. And their weapons, I mean, half the teams in the league would love to have Denver Broncos young receiving weapons.
Right.
Sutton, Judy, Tim Patrick, that's a solid core. And no, Noah Fant, Javonte
Hmm.
Williams. I mean, these guys could be studs. So they need a quarterback. But here's the problem: is unlike some other teams, just getting a Jimmy Garoppolo, just getting a Mitch Trubisky, it's not going to cut it in this division, really. So I think they either draft and they hope they find the next, they hope Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis or whoever is
Hmm.
Matt Corral is the next stud quarterback, or they need to make a big trade because otherwise you're going to waste all these young
Right.
receivers' talent, and
Right.
that's a tough situation. So, yeah, I mean, if that Rodgers trade materializes, obviously Nathaniel Hackett is the new coach, knows Rodgers
Right.
well from Green Bay. But if that doesn't, or if Rodgers wants to go somewhere else,
Hmm.
um, you gotta hope for finding a quarterback. So, drafting the guy could be the answer, but as we talked about before, this is not the best draft year. But one of these guys could end up being a really good quarterback.
Well, I think there's been a consistent theme in this discussion. I think we can wrap up by saying that in going around the whole entire NFL and every single team, if I counted, it feels like a third of the teams need quarterbacks. I don't know if it really is, and I'd have to go back and look. But I mean, it feels like the consistent theme is it's a quarterback-driven league, and feels like about a third of the teams need quarterbacks, and it's like a supply and demand situation, don't you think? It's like there
Yeah,
aren't enough via the draft and free agency, and even on the trades that everybody is going to get their guy, right? Did I?
yeah, no, because you have a situation. A lot of guys have retired recently or
Right.
seen their play fall off, and then a lot of not a lot, but a number of recently drafted guys have either been complete flops or
Hmm.
just major disappointments. So some of these teams, like we talked about, the Giants, I don't think are going to be on the quarterback market this year, but
Right.
they need to almost predict that we are going to be for next year. Same
Right.
with a team like the Texans. Same with the team, maybe the Browns if Baker isn't their guy. So it's really tough for if you don't have a quarterback. And then some of these teams we talked about, they're just hoping that Trey Lance can step in and be as good as Jimmy Garoppolo was and get the 49ers back to the postseason. Jets and Jags are hoping that Wilson and Lawrence
Right.
can be the guys. So there's no guarantees about anyone from last year's class. Mac Jones was the best quarterback, and
Right.
even there he could fall off. We've seen that before. So
Yeah.
um, it's a lot of teams need quarterbacks, and the best ones out there right now are guys on the trade market that we know for sure, guys on the trade market like a Jimmy Garoppolo, like a Carson Wentz. These guys have failed before, yeah, or not failed, but they've just they they feel like they've peaked, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to do it when you have to beat a Burrow or Mahomes or Stafford or Rodgers.
Well, yeah, you and I have talked about this, obviously, just because our family likes to talk football. It's just like it feels like we've lost due to retirement a lot of good quarterbacks in the last 3 years. This past year, obviously, being the goat of in Tom Brady retires, and then while there is so much young talent like Burrow and Herbert and Mahomes, and then Dak Prescott, and then there's still studs like obviously Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. It just feels like we are lacking in enough. Like there is like a true supply and demand issue in the quarterback market. So
Yeah, no, I
interesting to see where it shakes out.
yeah, no, I think that there is a big supply and demand because the top's still fine because the elite guys have still made it up there, like Mahomes, like Allen, like Burrow, but that second tier is much thinner than it used to be. And that's why teams like the
Yeah,
Vikings and Raiders don't
stay
really want to
pat.
move
Yeah.
on from Cousins and Carr.
Yeah, because what would you upgrade to,
Yeah.
So no. Well, I think that is a great segue to talk about Ultimate GM. Ultimate GM is a subscription that you can simulate the entire off season. So you can walk through the free agency. You can try to make player trades if you'd like, if you are looking for a quarterback or other positions and trade for players. You can obviously make cuts, restructure, sign players, and then with that information, walk into and simulate the 2022 NFL draft. Best part is you get to do it with no ads. So it is just $19.95 an entire year, and that is the Ultimate GM subscription. So definitely try on the clock, run simulations for the draft. Again, you learn a lot. And prep for free agency, next month is to subscribe to Ultimate GM. So, any other final thoughts before we kind of next week we'll be starting to talk about NFL Combine? Any final thoughts before for this week, Steve?
No, I think just as we talked about, there could be a lot of quarterback movement this year. And if some of these big trades do materialize, whether it's Watson, Rodgers, Wilson, all the above, it really could, create some domino effects. So that'll be interesting.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of On the Clock with Steve Shoup. We'll be back next week and every week talking more fun NFL draft topics. And until then, we will see you next time.